more in-depth look at what's happening in Africa, because it's almost 2 years since the Africa Free Trade Zone was established with the promises of broader and deeper economic integration. Well, there are, of course, many challenges facing Africa, as there are many parts of the world. So how can it protect itself from further economic woes? Well, I've been speaking to Ade Ayeyemi. He's CEO of EcoBank, the largest Pan-African bank with operations in 33 countries.
I think the challenges facing African economy is the same like the rest of the world. What's important is that we have to know, how did we get here? What do we need to do so that when we come out of this situation, we'll be in a much better place? The question of inflation is there. The global trade that has created challenges in terms of dollar liquidity in these countries, those are facts of life. What we are doing right now is making sure we allocate capital in a way that will ensure that the African countries come out of this much better than we went into it. To understand that we need to allocate capital for food security in all our countries. We need to allocate capital to ensure that we can start having light manufacturing, bringing things near shore, and ultimately to allocate capital to ensure that Africa can trade with itself. Because if we trade with ourselves, we'll be in a position to come out of this situation in a much better shape.
Yeah. One of the challenges that many economies across the world are facing is the rising dollar. Is that a problem that Africa is facing as well at this point in time, the strength of the dollar?
The strength of the dollar or the weakness of the currency in the various countries, we are all facing that. But also, with inflation that is going around globally, every country has to increase their interest rates to ensure that inflation is cured. The US is doing that. Every other country needs to do that so that on a relative basis, the dollar strength would then not be there at our disadvantage. But I think the bigger issue we face is the question of the increase in the prices of commodities, energy, and food that people are importing. That is a much bigger issue for our countries today, not just a question of interest rate of dollar going up.
I was very interested when you talked about the need for more trade between African countries. We have now, of course, the Africa Free Trade Zone. Is that making as much difference as it should?
It's early days, it's making impact. It's not as much as we want it to be, but we believe that as we go into the future, the understanding that to process cocoa in Ghana, to make chocolate with the sugar that is coming from Malawi and Zambia, and to sell those cocoa that has been processed in South Africa and in Northern Africa is the route that we have to take. And I think everybody understands that, and we're all working towards it. It's not just a question of the government, it's all the people in the continent understanding that the future of the continent is brighter when we trade together.
What are the challenges that's stopping that trade? Because if we look at Africa over the next 50, 60 years, this is going to be demographically the fastest growing part of the world. That's great economically, isn't it?
That's great economically. Remember that those youth create potential that we have to exploit, but we have to put the potential to good use before it can become a good economic outcome.
Can I ask you about Africa's development in terms of digitization? Because if we talk about fintech, Africa has led the way here. Do you see that use of technology in the financial sector is going to increase as we move forward? And where do you see the next developments happening?
Because we didn't have a choice, right? We have a large landmass, we have a large number of people, we need to reach them. And the best possible way to reach them is digitally. But what I can see happening is we are now going to start broadening out the use of technology, both in our agriculture, in the healthcare, and as we go forward, you see it in so many spheres of our life. And that technology will enable productivity and people to get connected much to each other. So it's not just going to be in fintech that alone. It's going to be in agri-tech, it's going to be in edu-tech. So all of those things, based on the critical mass of the financial technology that has been established, being able to migrate it to other spheres of life, because the best way you can scale content is through technology. Because today, we know that it is very expensive for our countries to be able to bring out foreign currency to enable children to be trained in the elite university of the world. Whereas if you use technology to scale the delivery of good content from the best universities, you can replicate that information and train a larger number of people.
Adi Ayeyemi, the CEO of EcoBank.